Hey guys, and welcome to the first episode of My Ideal NWR. And with this being the first episode, we might as well start with the number one engine himself, Thomas. Now, with this being an alternate take on Thomas, you're probably expecting me to change his basis, right? Well, you'd be wrong. I actually am keeping him in E2. And no, this isn't out of some loyalty to the lore. I genuinely don't have an issue with Thomas being an E2 tank engine from the LBSC. For starters, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, Thomas was built in 1915 and went to Sodor very soon after. And this makes him older than characters like Gordon. To some, this can be a problem, and I understand that, but first off, their age difference is only 6 years. In the life of a steam locomotive, that isn't too terribly long, especially considering Thomas is well past 100 at this point. And second, I'd say Thomas and Gordon are equally immature characters. At the beginning, both of them can be brash, rude, and demand respect, even if they don't necessarily deserve it. The only difference is, Gordon, being an A1, was kind of the poster child for the LNER, so he feels like he is owed respect, even if he hasn't necessarily done anything to deserve it. Thomas, on the other hand, feels that he has the most important job on the island and deserves respect for it. Speaking of this need for admiration, this is another reason why I think Thomas should be an E2. The E2 tank engines, they weren't significantly bad, but they also weren't significantly good either. They were purely adequate. Adequate enough to live for about 50 years, mind you, but just adequate. Imagine what being told you're just barely good enough does to someone. Thomas would feel the need to prove himself to be more than just good enough. This might actually explain why Thomas occasionally feels the need to put other engines down, by saying, "Blue's the only proper color for an engine," or "I'm sure he's not as strong as a Sodor engine," or most infamously, "I'm sure he went a really useful steam engine. You'll never be that." Thomas doesn't actually think that he's better than any of the people he's talking to. He feels the need to put them down so that he himself can feel important. Now, that doesn't justify his rude behavior, not in the slightest, but I do think it is something important to keep in mind. He clearly feels the need to prove himself, and sadly, sometimes that results in him putting others down. But normally Thomas sees sense and apologizes. Just look at his situation with Stepney. Now, even though I do think Thomas should be an E2, I would like my version of Thomas to eventually get the flat running board, like he does in the Railway series. When he arrives on Sodor, he would have the sloped running board, but following his breakfast incident, seeing as they'd have to replace the running board anyway, the Fat Controller would decide to standardize him to help with maintenance in the future. As one last clip note about Thomas, let's talk about his branch line. Similar to how the Little Western is clearly a love letter to the Great Western Railway, I think it'd be nice if Thomas's branch line had a couple elements from the LBSC incorporated into it. After all, if we go off of the television series models, Annie and Clarabelle are actually from the LBSC. Of course, engines like Percy and Toby have no association with that railway, but I think at least during the very early days when it's just Thomas, I think having the Farquhar branch be a love letter to that railway would be kind of sweet. And so, here's my ideal take on Thomas. Comment below what other characters you'd like me to ramble on about. But as for now, I've been Mr. Conductor 13, and I wish you a good day. Also, if you're expecting some April Fool's Day joke, sorry, not this time.